Hey guys, and welcome to the Ultimate Resource Farming Guide for 2018. In this video, I will attempt to teach you all you need to know about farming resources in Warframe. Now, this video is going to be pretty long, so if you just want to skip through it, there are timestamps in the video description as well as the comments down below. Now, we're going to do things a little bit differently this time around because instead of going by resources, we're going to go by planets, which I feel is far more relevant to a lot more people because you generally don't need resources from planets you haven't unlocked yet. And just one more thing before we start, you always have to bear in mind that all drops in Warframe are all about RNG, so if I recommend a mission, you run it once and not get what you're looking for, you may just have been screwed by RNG. Try and run it again. I've been playing this game for 5 years, so I'm fairly confident in saying that I know what works and what doesn't. Okay, so let us get started. When it comes to farming resources in Warframe, there are two ways you can do it if you want to do it efficiently. The first one is the tried and true resource multiplication, where you take a Warframe that can multiply resources into an endless mission, the most popular ones being Nekros with his Desecrate, Hydroid that's equipped with a Pilfering Swarm Augment, or Ivara with her Prowl ability that can steal additional loot from enemies. The second way is by Cata-Bombing the mission with Limbo, but this is a little bit more complicated, so I will go over it later. I personally prefer Nekros when it comes to resource multiplication because you don't have to pay attention to it. You simply turn on Desecrate and it will multiply your loot throughout the entire mission. So now that we've got the introduction and the basics out of the way, we're going to go through all the planets one by one, and I'm going to show you my favorite mission for farming when you want to use the standard resource multiplication method. So you're running a Desecrate Nekros, Pilfering Hydroid, or a Prowl Ivara. And the way I generally do things is I look for a survival. If there is not a survival, I will go for excavation, and if there is not an excavation, and then I will go for defense. And the reason I do that is because survival is always very reliable when it comes to spawning enemies, whereas excavation and defense tend to be a little bit sparse on enemies when you're running solo. Also, I'm not going to be recommending any Dark Sector missions because they are about to receive a massive overhaul and we have no idea if they're going to be good for farming. So in at number 1 we have Mercury, where you want to farm the infested survival Apollodorus. This has always been an amazing farming spot, even before it was taken over by the Infested when it was still under the control of the Grenade. Here you can farm Ferrite, Polymer Bundles, Morphics and Detonite Ampules. This is a very low level mission, so you can stay here for quite a while even with starter equipment and you will get loads of resources. This has always been one of my personal favorites, and it was made even better when it was taken over by the Infested, because the Infested rush straight for you, allowing you to kill them faster, which makes them respawn faster. In at number 2 we have Venus with the Corpus Survival V Prime. Here you can farm alloy plates, polymer bundles, circuits and field drone samples. Now, while you will most likely end up with a ton of alloy plates, circuits and field drone samples by just playing the game because they are fairly plentiful on the star chart, polymer bundles are a different story because they're used in crafting energy pizzas. And it's one of the two resources that I am always short on even after 5 years of playing this game. So you might as well get a bunch of them while you're on Venus. Now, another cool thing about this mission and Corpus missions in general is that they have a lot of containers, which you should definitely break if you see them because they can also contain resources. In at number 3 we have Earth, where I would recommend the Grenier Excavation Everest. Here you can farm Ferrite, Rubido, Neurodes and Detonite Ampules. This mission is also very low level, so you can stay here for quite a while even with starter equipment. You just have to keep an eye out on your excavators. This mission also has the added benefit in that you are also farming Cryotic by finishing excavators. And it's on Earth, so if you're lucky you might get yourself a Kubro egg or even a couple of Kubro mods. In at number 4 we have Mars, where I would recommend the Grenier Excavation Augustus. Here you can farm Gallium, Morphic, Salvage and Field Drone samples, and it's basically the same deal as Everest on Earth, just minus the Kubro stuff. Now, the enemy spawning in this mission used to be pretty bad, especially in solo mode, but that has been fixed, so it's now really good for farming. Then at number 5 we have Phobos, where I would recommend the Corpus Survival Stygne. Here you can farm Rubido, Morphics, Plastids and Alloy Plates. Now, this mission, just like V Prime on Venus, is using a Corpus tileset, so there is a bunch of containers that you can break to get additional resources. And while Rubido and Alloy Plates are fairly plentiful on the star chart and you will get a ton of them by just playing the game, Morphics are fairly rare. And Plastids are the second resource that I'm always short on, and you will probably be too, because they are an uncommon drop, so you're not gonna get them by the thousands. They're used in a ton of dojo decoration crafting, but also in crafting detonite injectors, field drone and mutagen mass, of which you need a lot of for faction-based weapons. So once again, you might as well pick up a bunch of them while you're on Phobos. In at number 6 we have Ceres, where I would recommend the Grenier Survival Draco. Here you can farm alloy plates, circuits, orokin cells and detonite ampules. The most important one here is the orokin cell, which is something you will always need. They are very rare, so they only drop in quantities of 1, and they are one of the most used crafting resources. Then at number 7 we have Jupiter, where I would recommend the Corpus Survival Elara. Here you can farm salvage, field drone samples, neural sensors and alloy plates. The important one here being neural sensors, which can only be farmed on Jupiter or the Kuva Fortress. And if, by the way, you've already unlocked the Kuva Fortress and you're only looking for neural sensors, you don't need salvage, field drone samples or alloy plates, you should go and farm them on the Kuva Fortress. Now, don't get me wrong, this mission is not bad for farming neural sensors. If you put in the time, you're gonna get loads of them. It's just that the rewards you can get on the Kuva Fortress are far better than the ones you can get here. Because unlike Jupiter, the Kuva Fortress is a tier 3 planet, so the rotation rewards are far better. Then at number 8 we have Europa, which is overall pretty terrible for farming resources, but if you want to farm here, I would recommend the mission Vial 4, which is a Corpus excavation. And here you can farm Morphix, Rubido, field drone samples and control modules. Now I know some people really like this tileset, and I like it as well in like exterminate or capture missions, but for endless stuff, this tileset is just not very good. It's not as bad as it used to be, but it's still not as good as it could be. It's not that big of a deal though, because all the resources that drop here can be farmed elsewhere. Coming in at number 9 we have Saturn, where I would recommend the Grenier Survival Titan. Here you can farm nanospores, plastates, orokin cells and detonite ampules. This is a really good combination of resources because once again plastates and orokin cells are two resources that you're going to be using all the time. It also has one of the best survival tilesets in the game, the Grenier Galleon, because the enemies just really like this one. The pathfinding is flawless, they will rush straight for you. And it even has a couple of special spots where you can plop yourself down and the enemies will literally jump right up to you, so you can just sit there and cut them down as they jump up. Then at number 10 we have Uranus, where I would recommend the Grenier Submersible Survival Ophelia. Here you can farm gallium, plastates, polio bundles, detonite ampules, and since it is a submersible mission and requires you to equip an arcwing to do it, you can also get tellurium. This is one of the best survival missions for farming because there are no issues with pathfinding, the enemies will rush straight for you so you can kill them faster and they will respawn faster. You're gonna get plastates and polio bundles, both of which you're going to be using en masse all the time. And even though it is pretty rare, you're gonna get tellurium as well, which you can only farm in arcwing missions, submersible missions, and on the Kuva Fortress. And on top of all that, the Drakkar enemies, which you can only find on Uranus, drop a bunch of unique Exilus mods that you can't get anywhere else. Then at number 11 we have Neptune, where I would recommend the Corpus Excavation Despina. Here you can farm nanospores, ferrite, control modules and field drone samples. This mission is using the original Corpus Excavation tileset, which is in my opinion the best excavation tileset in the game. It's a shame then that none of the resources you can get here are all that important. All of them are fairly plentiful on the start chart, so you're gonna get a bunch of them by just playing the game. If, however, you find yourself running low on any of these, you can just jump on the Despina for a bit and farm them there. It's pretty damn nice. Then at number 12 we have Pluto, where I would recommend the Corpus Survival Palace. Here you can farm Rubido, Morphix, Plastate, alloy plates and field drone samples. Now this is an awesome survival mission for multiple different reasons. It's using the Corpus ship tileset, so the enemy pathfinding is fantastic and it has a ton of containers that you can break for additional resources. It's also a tier 3 survival, so the rotation rewards are pretty damn good and it drops an absolute ton of stuff because you have 5 resources rather than the standard 4. Coming in at number 13 we have Sedna, where I would recommend the Grenier Survival Selkie. Here you can farm alloy plates, rubido, salvage and detonite ampules. This is an awesome survival because of the tileset. It has a lot of choke points where you can camp and kill the enemies as they walk through, which is a shame because the resources you can get here are nothing special. You will get tons of them by just playing the game normally. But it is a tier 3 survival, so the rotation rewards are basically as good as they get. So if you ever find yourself running low on any of these, you can just jump on Selkie for a little bit. And at number 14 we have Eris, where I would recommend the Infested Survival Nimbus. Here you can farm nanospores, plastates, neurodes and mutagen samples. Now there are only 2 places where you can farm mutagen samples, here and in the Derelict. One of them is really good, one of them is really bad. This one is the bad. Don't farm mutagen samples on Eris. Nanospores, plastates and neurodes? Sure, go ahead, you're gonna get plenty of each if you put in the time, but when it comes to mutagen samples, simply go to the Derelict, where you're gonna get about 5 times as many for the same amount of invested time. This is also a tier 3 survival, so the rotation rewards are as good as they get. Then at number 15 we have the Void, where I would recommend the Corrupted Survival Annie. Here you can farm ferrite, rubido, argon crystals and control modules. And 99% of the time you're gonna farm this one for argon crystals, which you cannot get anywhere else, though don't farm them in advance because they decay over time and will disappear after like a day or two. Then at number 16 we have the Derelict, where you definitely want to go for survival. Here you can farm nanospores, mutagen samples, Orokin cells and neurodes, and this is, as I've mentioned already, hands down the best mutagen sample farm in the game. It's also really good for farming nanospores. You're gonna get them by the thousands, and it's not too shabby for Orokin cells and neurodes either. It also has a pretty good selection of Litralicks in the rotation rewards, and rotation C is the only place where you can get Octavia's neuroptics, with about a 22% chance for them to drop. Then at number 17 we have Lua, or the Moon, where I would recommend the Corpus Survival Tycho. Here you can farm Ferrite, Rubido, Neurodes and Detonite Ampules. This is in my opinion still the best place to farm Neurodes because of the Sentients, which are considered a mini-boss and thus have a very high chance of dropping rare resources. They will show up every 5-ish minutes throughout the survival, and I think the mission spawns 2 of them for each player in the mission, so if you have a full party you're gonna get 8 each time. They can also drop Orokin cells even though they're not in the Lua drop table, and they drop intact and exceptional sentient cores now. So yeah, farming the sentients on the Moon is even better than it was before, and it was already pretty good. And finally at number 18 we have the Kuva Fortress, where you definitely want to go for the new endless Kuva survival Taveuni. Here you can farm salvage, circuits, neurosensors, detonite ampules, and since you do need an Arcwing equip to do this mission, you can also get tellurium. Now even though I saw a lot of people saying that this mission is just not rewarding enough, it is straight up the most rewarding survival in the entire game. It is a tier 3 survival, so the rotation rewards are as good as they get. It drops a ton of resources because you get a stupid amount of enemies spawning at all times. Kuva Guardians and Jesters, which will spawn every now and then, drop endo and some rare mods. And every time Lotus sends you a life support capsule, the game will spawn an enemy that will carry around a Kuva canister. This will either be an Eximus unit or a Kuva Guardian. If you then kill the enemy, which the game will mark for you, pick up the canister and bring it to the life support capsule, it will turn it into a Kuva harvester, which you need to defend for 1 minute, after which it will give you 200 Kuva. So if you ever need anything that you can get by doing this mission, do this mission. Now I know people will be asking about Kuva because it is a resource, and this mission is not as time efficient for farming Kuva as siphons and floods. So what you want to do is simply run all the floods and the siphons, and once you don't have any floods or siphons, go here. Now there's also Nitain Extract, and the best way to get that is to either follow one of the websites that display Warframe alerts or follow one of the Twitter accounts that do the same thing. However, there is another way to farm Nitain. You can get it from the caches in sabotage missions, but this is so not worth it, it hurts. You could do 50 sabotage missions and get all 3 caches in all of them and don't get a single Nitain Extract. So do that at your own risk. I very much not recommend it. And now let's talk a little bit about Cata-Bombing with a Limbo, which I would only recommend you do in solo mode. To do this, you are obviously going to need a Limbo, but also a Sentinel with Vacuum, otherwise you're going to spend way too much time picking up the loot and it's not going to be worth it. What you want to do here is put on as much range and efficiency while squeezing in at least a little bit of power strength and some defense. And you mostly want to focus on capture missions where you don't actually have to kill anything, you just have to down one target, jump into the rift, capture them, and then run to the extraction. The idea here is that we want to break all the containers and resource nodes as fast as possible, and we're doing that on Limbo because his Cataclysm can get stupendous amounts of range with the initial cast, and it doesn't require line of sight to hit. Now this does require a little bit more finesse because you are fairly squishy. You cannot stay in the rift on most maps because you simply cannot cast Cataclysm far enough to miss yourself with it. You can dash back into the rift as soon as you pop your Cataclysm, but that is going to get very tiring very fast because you're going to be casting Cataclysm a lot. Which is why you want to utilize things such as glide casting, where you think a little bit ahead, you jump, start gliding, and you cast Cataclysm while you're gliding. Because in high level missions, standing still and casting Cataclysm is going to get you killed. Now this is also not going to be as good if you are not familiar with the tile sets, because if you are familiar with the tile sets, you generally know where the containers and resource nodes tend to spawn, and you're also going to be much faster at traversing it. But if you get really good at this and you can really rush through the mission while sniping a ton of containers and resource nodes, you can get about as much loot as you would get in a 5-minute survival, but in about a minute and a half. It's also the best setup for finding Atom sculptures, because if you get some loot radar, which I am getting from Animal Instinct that I have on my Sentinel, you Cata-Bomb a room and there is still a square on the minimap, there's a pretty good chance it's a sculpture because Cataclysm doesn't miss. So if this looks like something you would like to do, here are the missions that I would recommend. On Ceres, you want to do Lex. In the Derelict, you want to do Capture. Then if you want to do this on Earth, I would actually recommend Mariana, which is an Exterminate mission, but the enemies are so low level, your Cataclysm is going to one-shot them. On Eris, you want to do ISOS. Just be mindful of the Juggernaut, who will be alerted every time you capture the target. On Europa, you want to do Abaddon, which is a capture mission. It unfortunately had an invasion over it. Then on Jupiter, I would recommend Anarchy, which is really good because this Corpus tile set has a ton of containers throughout the entire mission. Then on the Kuva Fortress, I would recommend the mission Nabok, which is very dangerous, by the way, so be careful because you can very easily start casting Cataclysm in the wrong place, like on top of a mine or near a turret. Then on the moon, I would recommend Copernicus, where you can actually get a little bit fancy and get yourself some extra, because every now and then when you capture the target, it will spawn the sentient, so you can take those down before extracting. Then on Mars, I would recommend Ara. On Mercury, I would recommend Elion. On Neptune, I would recommend Galatea. On Phobos, I would recommend Skyreach. On Pluto, I would recommend Hydra. For Saturn, I would recommend Enchiladas, which is actually a sabotage mission, but it's the original old school sabotage, so there is none of that reactor stuff. All you have to do is destroy between 1 and 3 mining machines. That's it. On Sedna, I would recommend Rusalka. Then I would very much not recommend you do this on Uranus, because if you run into a Sharkwing section, it's gonna slow you down to a point where it's not worth it. But if you really want to do it, go for Ariel. On Venus, I would recommend Venera. And finally, in the Void, I would recommend Hipit. And that's pretty much it for the video, so I thank you very much for watching. As always guys, I hope you've enjoyed it and it was helpful. I wish you good luck when farming resources. And if you're curious about fishing or mining in the plains, I did a full video guide for both of these, which I will link in the description and the comment down below. And as always, I will see you next time. Bye bye.